I stood frozen in the doorway of our family home, my heart pounding in my chest. The smell of dinner lingered in the air, but the warmth of the house, the very essence of everything we had built together, suddenly felt suffocating. I couldn't even breathe as he looked at me, his words cutting through the silence like a jagged knife. "Lena," he began, his voice oddly calm, "I sold the house. The money's already gone. I gave $400,000 to Liza." I felt my legs give way, but I held onto the doorframe just in time to keep from collapsing. "What?" My voice trembled, barely a whisper. "You... what did you just say?" His gaze never wavered. "I sold the family property. Liza and I... we need the money to start our life together. I thought it was the right thing to do." I couldn't process the words. The house we had raised our children in, where we had celebrated anniversaries, birthdays, where we had shared every joyful moment and weathered every storm, was gone. Just like that. Sold without a second thought, without a shred of consideration for me. And for what? So that he could start a life with her? With Liza? The woman who had been nothing but a shadow on the periphery, now suddenly placed at the center of our world. "I can't believe you," I whispered, my hands shaking. "How could you do this to us?" His eyes softened for a moment, and I saw a flicker of guilt, but it quickly vanished. "It's not like that. I just—" "No," I interrupted, my voice rising. "You don't get to explain this. You don't get to throw us away for her and act like it's fine. You sold our family home, John. You handed her money that should have been for our family. And now you're going to live in my house?" He shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. A rush of cold, sharp anger filled my chest. How could he be so blind? How could he do this to me? To us? The man I had loved for so many years, the man I had built a life with, was now a stranger. It was as if the years we spent together meant nothing to him. My thoughts spiraled, each one more painful than the last. I turned away, unable to look at him anymore. "You've humiliated me. You've destroyed everything I thought we had. And for what? A fresh start with her?" "Lena, please," he called after me, but I couldn't bear to hear another word. As I walked away, I felt my world crumbling. The pain was sharp, unbearable. But more than that, it was the betrayal. How had I not seen this coming? Had I been so blind, so trusting, that I failed to notice the cracks forming in the foundation of our marriage? For the first time in years, I truly felt alone. I stumbled to the living room, the house feeling alien, as if I no longer had a place in it. And then, it hit me. They were already living here. He and Liza, the woman who had taken my place, and now, with $400,000 in her hands, was settling into my life. Our life. And I had no choice but to let it happen. Or did I? So, before I get too comfortable here, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I'm sharing with you. I'm sharing my story because it's one I never imagined I'd have to tell. Let me know where you're watching from, because I need to know how far this story has reached. And believe me, this isn't the end. Not by a long shot. Looking back now, I can see all the signs I missed. The little things that never seemed important at the time. Like how John would come home late from work, his face distant and tired. Or how he'd suddenly be too busy to talk when I needed him most. I always brushed it off, thinking he was just stressed. That he was working too hard. After all, who wouldn't be, right? Life had its ups and downs, and we'd been through so much together. Why would I have suspected something like this was coming? I remember one night, about 6 months before all of this exploded, when I tried to talk to him. I was sitting at the kitchen table, stirring a pot of soup, the sound of the spoon scraping against the bowl filling the silence. I tried to make small talk, but John didn't respond. His mind was somewhere else, somewhere far from me. I asked him what was wrong, but he just muttered something about work stress and changed the subject. Looking back now, I realize that was the beginning. It wasn't the huge blowout arguments, the late-night fights. It was these quiet, subtle moments when I felt the distance growing between us. It was in the way he stopped asking about my day, the way he stopped looking at me like I was the only woman in the room. I could feel his attention slipping away, but I told myself I was just being paranoid. Relationships go through rough patches, don't they? Maybe we were just going through one. But then came the lies. Small at first, barely noticeable, until they weren't. John started coming home later than usual, claiming he was working overtime. Then it became, I'm going out with some friends, followed by more unexplained absences. Every time I asked, the excuses came easier. His phone became a fortress, his messages erased as soon as he was done with them, his calls hidden under the guise of work or important business. It didn't take long before I started wondering if I was losing him. I should have confronted him sooner, shouldn't I? But I told myself that I was just overthinking things, that it wasn't a big deal, that everything would get better on its own. I even convinced myself that maybe I was just imagining things, that I was just being a paranoid wife who didn't trust her husband. After all, wasn't that what people said when they were in my shoes? Then came the night I'll never forget. It was a Wednesday. We'd just had dinner, and I was washing the dishes when John walked into the room, holding an envelope. He was acting strange, like he was trying to hide something. I didn't think much of it at first, assuming it was just another bill or business letter. But then, out of nowhere, he handed it to me. "You'll want to see this," he said, avoiding my gaze. I opened the envelope and found the papers for the sale of our house, our family home. The same house we had promised each other we'd grow old in, the place where our children had grown up, where we'd celebrated every important milestone. It was all gone, signed away, just like that. I looked up at him, my eyes filled with confusion and anger. "What is this?" I demanded. He didn't answer at first. Instead, he shifted uncomfortably, rubbing the back of his neck. I could see the guilt in his eyes, but it wasn't enough to make him open up. Finally, he spoke. "I sold the house. We need the money. For Liza." Liza, the name that had been quietly haunting the back of my mind for months. The name I never thought would come up in such a context. His mistress, the woman who had taken my place, was now the reason for all of this. For the house, for the money, for the life we had once shared. It hit me like a punch to the stomach. How could he? How could he betray me like this? His words, though quiet, burned with finality. "I'm doing this for us." For the future, I stared at the papers, unable to process what I was hearing. Was I really standing there, holding the paperwork for the sale of the place I had called home for so many years? Was this really my life now? Was my marriage over? In that moment, everything shifted. The world around me blurred, and I couldn't understand how I had gotten here. The man I had trusted with everything, the man I had loved, had taken everything from me. And for what? For a woman who didn't know the first thing about what it meant to build a life, to sacrifice, to love unconditionally. And the worst part? I had been too blind to see it coming. I had let him drift away, thinking that it was just a rough patch. But now, the truth was clear. He was gone. And with him went the family I had worked so hard to build. I wasn't sure what to do next. I wasn't sure if I could stay in the same house with him, with her, knowing everything that had been ripped away from me. I had no choice but to stand there, helpless, as he handed over the very thing I cherished most in this world to someone else. But was this the end of my story? Or the beginning of something I wasn't prepared for? The following days were a blur. It felt like I was walking through a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. The house, our home, didn't feel like mine anymore. It was as if someone had ripped the soul out of it, leaving only the empty shell behind. Everywhere I looked, there were memories, good and bad. But now, those memories felt tainted, as if the very walls were mocking me. John's behavior only made things worse. He acted like nothing had changed. He was still the man who came home at the end of each day, still wearing that same tired smile. But the truth was, I couldn't even look at him without feeling nauseous. How could he look me in the eye after what he had done? How could he act like I was supposed to accept his betrayal with a smile? We were sitting at the dinner table one night. Him, me, and the empty chair where our son used to sit. The awkward silence was unbearable, but John kept talking as if everything was normal. He was telling me about his plans for the future, his hopes for the life he was building with Liza. I wanted to scream. How could he talk about the future with such excitement when he had just torn my world apart? And then it hit me. I wasn't just angry, I was hurt. Deeply, irrevocably hurt. I had spent years by his side, sacrificing everything to make our family work, to keep the peace, to create a life we could be proud of. And now, here he was, talking about the life he was building with someone else, as if none of it mattered, as if I didn't matter. I tried to speak, to find the words that would express the whirlwind of emotions inside me, but nothing came out. My throat was tight, like there was a lump of grief and rage lodged in there, suffocating me. The silence stretched on, and for a moment, I just stared at him. "You really thought you could just leave me like this?" I finally whispered, my voice barely above a breath. John stopped mid-sentence, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. He looked at me, genuinely surprised by the question. It was almost as if he had forgotten the gravity of what he had done. "What do you mean?" he asked, as if it were a simple misunderstanding. "What do you mean?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You sold our home. You gave away our life savings. You handed everything we worked for to her. And now, you're sitting here talking about plans for a future that doesn't include me?" He looked away, his face flushed with embarrassment. I saw the guilt flicker in his eyes. But it was too little, too late. I wanted to slap him, to shout at him until my voice gave out. But instead, I stood up. "I can't do this anymore, John. I can't sit here and pretend like nothing's wrong. I can't pretend like I'm okay with what you've done." He reached out, his hand hovering over mine, but I pulled away. "Don't touch me," I spat. "Not after everything you've done." I couldn't stay in the same room with him. I needed air. I needed space. I needed to think. I rushed out of the house, ignoring his calls behind me. The night air was cool, a sharp contrast to the suffocating warmth of the house I had just left. I walked aimlessly, letting the wind whip through my hair, trying to clear my head. But no matter how far I walked, no matter how much I tried to escape the overwhelming thoughts crashing into my mind, one truth remained. John had sold our family's future for a woman who didn't even know the first thing about what it meant to build a life. And now, they were living in my house. I found myself standing outside our old home, the lights dim and flickering inside, just as they had been before everything changed. The house that had once been the foundation of our dreams now felt like a stranger's house. I had to face the reality. He had chosen her over me. He had sold everything we had, everything that had ever meant anything to me, so he could start a new life with someone else. The bitterness, the anger, the sense of betrayal, it all hit me like a wave. I had given everything to him, and he had thrown it all away like it meant nothing. But more than that, it was the disrespect. The way he had treated me like I didn't matter, like I was just a stepping stone for him to get to the next phase of his life. And in that moment, I realized that I wasn't just grieving the loss of my husband. I was grieving the loss of my dignity. He had taken it all, our home, our life, our future, and handed it to someone else. But I wasn't going to let him take me too. I wasn't going to let him strip me of my self-worth, not without a fight. I didn't know what I was going to do next, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let this be the end of my story. The days that followed were heavy with silence. John and I barely exchanged a word, and when we did, it was only about trivial things. What bills needed to be paid, what groceries needed to be bought. The distance between us grew by the hour, and the resentment swelled inside me. How could I look at him the same way? How could I pretend that everything was fine when my world was falling apart? It wasn't long before I knew I couldn't keep pretending. I had to confront him. I couldn't go on living like this, like I was invisible in my own life. I had to speak the words that had been building inside me for days, weeks, months. The pain, the anger, the humiliation. It was all too much. One evening, as I was sitting on the couch, trying to focus on a book, I felt him stand in the doorway, hesitating. His presence alone made my skin crawl, but I knew this was the moment. If I didn't speak now, I never would. John, I said quietly, not looking up from the pages. I could feel him tense, his breath hitching. We need to talk. He didn't say anything at first, but I heard the soft shuffle of his feet as he walked into the room. He sat down beside me, but there was no comfort in it. It was as if we were strangers, sharing the same space, but living in entirely different worlds. I can't keep living like this, I said, finally lifting my eyes to meet his. I can't keep pretending that everything's fine. You sold our house, you gave away money that should have been for our future, and now you're living with her. In my house. He opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off, unable to hold back the flood of emotions any longer. How could you do this to me? How could you do this to us? You didn't just hurt me, John. You destroyed everything, everything I thought we had, everything I worked for. He flinched at my words, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of the man I used to love. Guilt, regret, even fear. But it didn't matter. It was too late for apologies. It was too late to fix this. The damage had already been done. I didn't mean for it to happen this way, he said, his voice soft, almost pleading. I didn't want to hurt you. I was confused. Things weren't working between us. And then, Liza came into my life. I never wanted to make you feel like you didn't matter. Don't, I snapped. Don't give me excuses. You made a choice, John. You chose her. You chose to sell our home, to betray me, to throw everything away. And now you want to tell me you didn't mean to hurt me? My voice broke, and I could feel the tears threatening to spill. You made me feel like I was nothing, like I was disposable. His face softened, but it wasn't enough. Nothing he said would be enough to erase what he had done. I'm sorry, he whispered, but his apology fell flat. I never meant to destroy our family. The words rang hollow in the air. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in years, I didn't recognize the man sitting beside me, the man who had once been my partner, my friend, the father of my children. He was gone. In his place was a man who had shattered everything, who had taken away my sense of security, my sense of self, and replaced it with nothing but empty promises. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said quietly, the weight of the truth settling heavily on my shoulders. I don't know if I want to. John looked away, unable to meet my gaze. I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I had cried enough. I had been weak enough. Not anymore. You've hurt me more than I can put into words, I continued, my voice gaining strength with every word. And now, you want me to sit here and act like everything's okay? Like we can just move past this? Well, I can't. I won't. The silence between us stretched out, unbearable, as we both sat there, the weight of our broken marriage hanging in the air. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had some control over my life. I wasn't the victim anymore. I wasn't going to let him dictate how I felt, how I moved forward. I stood up, suddenly feeling exhausted, as if the conversation had drained every last bit of energy from me. I need some space, John, I said, my voice steady but firm. I need to figure out what I want, and I need you to respect that. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room. The sound of his footsteps behind me made my heart race, but I didn't look back. I couldn't. I didn't know what was going to happen next. I didn't know if our marriage could survive this, but what I did know was that I wasn't going to let him continue to destroy me. Not anymore. The next few days were a blur. I moved through the motions, but my mind couldn't stop replaying everything that had happened. The betrayal, the lies, the house, my home, now a place where I barely felt welcome, where I no longer felt like the woman who had once lived there, full of dreams and love for her family. John and Liza were there, living in my house. Every time I walked into the kitchen or down the hallway, I could hear them laughing, talking about their plans for the future. I wanted to scream, but instead, I would retreat into the quiet of my room. I couldn't even look at them, without feeling the weight of their betrayal crushing me. John had tried to talk to me a few times, but I wasn't ready to listen. He said things like, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen," and "Can we try to make this work?" But nothing he said could change the fact that he had handed over everything we built, everything we had, to Liza. He had chosen her, not just once, but again and again, in ways I couldn't even begin to understand. I kept telling myself that I needed space. I needed time to think. But every time I looked around the house, all I saw was them. Their presence haunted every corner, and it felt like I was suffocating under the weight of their new life. It was like living with ghosts, but not the kind that haunt the past. No, these were the ghosts of my future, the dreams that had been snatched away from me in an instant. One evening, as I sat in the living room, trying to distract myself with a book, I heard their voices coming from the kitchen. They were planning a trip together, a vacation, something that would mark the beginning of their life as a couple. I could hear the excitement in John's voice, and it hit me like a punch in the stomach. He was so eager, so full of life, planning a future with her, while I sat here, broken and alone in the very house that was supposed to be our home. I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't live under the same roof as them. I needed to take back control, even if it meant facing the consequences of my choices. The next day, I went out and hired a lawyer. I couldn't just let him have everything. The house was mine, too. The money he'd given to Liza. Well, I would make sure he paid for that, too. The lawyer assured me that with the right steps, I could start to reclaim what was mine. But even as she spoke, I felt the weight of the reality settling in. This wasn't going to be easy. This wasn't going to be quick. And I was going to have to fight, every single step of the way. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of hope. A tiny flame that flickered in the darkness. I could do this. I could stand up for myself. I didn't have to let John or Liza take everything from me. That night, I sat in the quiet of my room, looking out at the darkened sky. I had always loved the peace of the evening. It had been my time to reflect, to gather my thoughts. But tonight, I wasn't just reflecting. I was planning. I was figuring out how to rebuild my life, how to reclaim my dignity, how to move forward. I wasn't sure how long it would take, or how much pain I would have to endure. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let them win. I wasn't going to let them turn my life into their playground, a place for them to build their new beginning, while I faded into the background. I had spent too long living in the shadows of my own life. Now it was time to step into the light. The next morning, I woke up with a new resolve. I had a plan, and I would fight for it. For myself. For the first time in weeks, I felt something that resembled strength. Something that felt like I could take on whatever came next. Liza had always been polite, even charming when I saw her at family gatherings. But now, living in my house, I started to see a different side of her. It wasn't loud or overt. No, it was much more subtle. The way she would help around the house, folding laundry and straightening things up, all while pretending like she wasn't taking over every inch of my space. At first, I tried to stay out of her way. I thought maybe, with time, I would get used to the awkwardness of living with her and John under the same roof. But it wasn't that simple. Every conversation with Liza felt like an underlying power play, small comments here and there that were meant to remind me who was in control. She was polite, yes, but it was always just a little too perfect, too rehearsed. I would catch her looking at me when she thought I wasn't paying attention, as if she was measuring me, sizing me up. She would smile, but it never reached her eyes. One afternoon, as I was sitting in the living room, she walked in with a tray of coffee, acting as if she was just being kind. But the moment she handed me the cup, I saw it. The faintest smirk that disappeared as quickly as it appeared. It was a look of someone who knew she had won, who knew she had taken everything from me without breaking a sweat. I took the coffee, trying to keep my composure. But inside, I was burning with resentment. How had I allowed this to happen? How had I allowed her to come into my home and act like it was hers? "Thanks," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You're welcome," she replied, her tone so sweet it made me sick. "I hope you're doing okay. I know things must be hard right now." "Hard," I repeated, unable to keep the bitterness out of my voice. "It's more than hard. It's humiliating." Her smile faltered for just a second, but it quickly returned. "I'm sure it feels that way, but you have to understand. John and I, we're building something. We're starting fresh. And that's what's best for everyone, don't you think?" I wanted to scream. How dare she say that? Best for everyone? What about me? What about everything I had built in this house, in this life? "I'm glad you're happy," I said, my words dripping with sarcasm. "But I'm not sure what you mean by best for everyone. I certainly don't feel like I'm benefiting from any of this." Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she quickly recovered. "I didn't mean it like that. I just think that sometimes change is good, don't you?" I wanted to lash out, to tell her exactly what I thought of her and John, but I knew better. I couldn't let her see how much she had hurt me. I couldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me break down. So, I forced a smile, took my coffee, and stood up. "I'm going to my room," I said, walking away before she could say anything else. I could feel her eyes on me, but I didn't look back. I couldn't. The more I stayed in the same space with her, the more I realized how much control she was taking. It wasn't just about the house or the money. It was about power. She had positioned herself in a place where she could take everything from me, piece by piece, and I didn't know how to stop it. It was subtle, but it was there. She had made herself the center of my world, the one who would decide how things played out. Every time she spoke, every gesture she made, it felt like she was taking another piece of me away. I had to find a way to regain control, to take back what was mine. But how? How do you fight a battle when the person you're up against is already sitting in your seat, wearing your shoes? As I retreated to my room, the anger began to swell inside me once again. But this time, it wasn't just rage. It was a realization. This was no longer just about John and his betrayal. This was about me reclaiming my life, my home, my dignity. I wasn't going to let Liza walk all over me. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me into submission. But the road ahead was unclear. I knew I had to make my next move carefully. I needed to outsmart them both. I just wasn't sure how yet. Sometimes, when the house was too quiet and I found myself alone, I couldn't help but look back. I couldn't stop thinking about the life I had once shared with John, the good times, the memories, the promises we made to each other. How had it all gone so wrong? It wasn't just the house that I had lost. It was everything. The love we shared, the years of memories, the sense of security I had built around us. I remember the first time John held my hand, the way he looked at me with such tenderness, like I was the most important person in the world. The first time we brought our son home, and how he held me close, both of us exhausted but filled with joy. That was the man I thought I had married, the man who promised me forever. Where did that man go? How could he have just vanished, leaving me with nothing but this shadow of a life? It hurt to think about it. It hurt to remember how it used to be, how happy we had been. There were times when I could still feel the warmth of those moments, like a soft breeze in the back of my mind. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that those memories, beautiful as they were, only made the present harder to bear. I thought about the first time we bought this house. It was just a small place, nothing extravagant, but it was ours. It was a symbol of everything we had worked for. We had dreamed of it together, walking hand in hand, imagining the life we would build here. The kids running through the halls, birthday parties, Christmas mornings, family dinners. The house was full of life, full of love. And now, it was full of them. John and Liza, building their life in the very space that I had once filled with warmth and laughter. The irony wasn't lost on me. How could he stand there, pretending everything was fine, when he had taken everything from me? The house, the future, the life I had worked so hard to create. All of it, gone in an instant. But more than that, it was the betrayal. The quiet, insidious way he had distanced himself from me over the years. The way he had pulled away when I needed him the most. It wasn't just the sale of the house that shattered me. It was the realization that I had been blind to the slow erosion of our marriage. I had ignored the signs, convinced myself that it was just a rough patch, that things would get better. Looking back, I could see the cracks, the moments when we drifted apart, the nights when he came home late, the times he was too tired to talk, the little lies that piled up over the years. I had believed him every time he said it was nothing, every time he promised that things would get better. But now, those promises felt like a cruel joke. He had already made his choice. And Lisa, she wasn't just a woman who had stolen my husband. She was a symbol of everything I had lost. She was the face of my humiliation, the one who had walked into my life and taken my place without a second thought. She had everything I wanted: the life, the future, the security. She was living the life that should have been mine. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. How could I have let this happen? How had I let her take so much from me without a fight? But now I was awake. I wasn't the same person I had been before. I wasn't the quiet, complacent woman who had allowed herself to be pushed aside. I was angry, yes, but I was also ready. Ready to take back what was mine. Ready to fight for my dignity, for my life. As I stood up from the chair, looking around the room that once held so many memories, I realized something important. The house wasn't just four walls. It was the symbol of everything I had built. And I wasn't going to let anyone take that from me, not without a fight. I might have lost the house, but I wasn't going to lose myself. The more I lived in this nightmare, the more I realized something had shifted inside me. At first, I was consumed with anger, with the need to make them pay for what they'd done to me. But as the days passed, as I watched John and Liza settle into my home, I found something else beginning to rise within me. It wasn't just rage, it was clarity. A clarity I hadn't felt in a long time. I was standing in the kitchen, absent-mindedly washing a dish, when I felt it. That quiet realization that despite everything, I still had control. I had control of my life, of my choices, and it was time to stop being a passive victim in my own story. For months, I had felt like I was drowning, like the walls were closing in, but now I could see the way out. The power was mine to reclaim. I had spent so many years wrapped up in this idea of who I was supposed to be: John's wife, the mother of our children, the caretaker of the family home. I had given so much of myself to those roles, to the point where I had forgotten who I was underneath it all. But now, as I stood there, I realized I had lost myself in the process of trying to make everyone else happy. I had been so focused on keeping the peace, on being the good wife, that I had allowed my own happiness to slip through my fingers. I had let John's neglect, his distance, and his betrayal define me. But no more. I wasn't just a wife who had been wronged. I was Lena, a woman with a life to live, a future to create. The woman who had built everything she had from the ground up, who had fought for the people she loved, who had poured everything into making a home. And if John couldn't see that, if he couldn't appreciate the sacrifices I had made, then maybe it was time to stop fighting for him. I didn't need his approval. I didn't need his validation. I was strong enough to stand on my own, even if it meant standing alone. And as for Liza, well, she was just another obstacle in my way. I had let her take my place in the house, but she would never take my spirit. I would never let her. I picked up the phone and dialed the number for the lawyer again. This time, I didn't hesitate. This time, I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to sit back and let them build their life on the ruins of mine. I was going to fight for my right to move on, for my right to rebuild. "Hello, this is Lena," I said when the lawyer picked up. "I'm ready to move forward with the case. I want to take back control of what's mine." I could hear the lawyer's voice on the other end, steady and professional, but I didn't need to hear anything else. I knew what I had to do. It wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be quick. But I was finally ready to take back what I had lost, piece by piece, until I stood tall again. I hung up the phone and took a deep breath. the weight in my chest lifting just a little. I wasn't going to let this break me. I wasn't going to let them take everything from me. I was going to rebuild my life, no matter how long it took, no matter how hard it got. And the first step was admitting to myself that I deserved better than this. I deserved more than to be a bystander in my own tragedy. It was time to fight for my future. The weeks passed, and John's guilt began to bleed through, though never as much as I needed it to. He tried to speak with me, tried to make amends in the most shallow ways possible, but I wasn't fooled. He apologized, yes, but his apologies felt hollow, as if he was more concerned with easing his own conscience than with truly understanding the hurt he'd caused me. I could see it in his eyes, the guilt, the regret, but it was always followed by a sense of defensiveness, like he was trying to justify his actions rather than own them. Every apology felt rehearsed, like something he had practiced to make himself feel better about his decisions. But his words were nothing compared to the depth of pain I was experiencing. What use were words now? What use was, "I'm sorry," when they couldn't undo the damage? One evening, after yet another awkward exchange in the kitchen, John sat me down again, his voice soft but filled with desperation. "Lena, I need you to understand. I never meant for any of this to happen. I wasn't thinking clearly. I got lost. But I'm here now. I'm sorry." His words washed over me like water off a stone. It wasn't the apology I needed, not the one that would heal me, not the one that would make things right. He was apologizing because he felt guilty, not because he had a true understanding of what he had done to me, to us. "Sorry doesn't fix anything, John," I replied, my voice steady but with an edge of coldness. "It's too late for that now. You made your choice, and this," I gestured around the room, "this is the result." His face fell, his eyes softening, but I wasn't moved. His regret wasn't enough to change the reality of what had happened. It didn't change the fact that he had torn apart everything we had. The house, the life we built, the dreams we shared. They were all shattered. And for what? For Liza? "I know I can't take back what I did," John continued, his voice breaking. "But I want to make things right. I want us to fix this." I looked at him, feeling the weight of his words, but no matter how badly he wanted to fix it, I knew the damage was too deep. He had taken my trust, my home, and now my peace of mind. You don't rebuild something so fragile with words alone, not after it's been shattered beyond recognition. "You can't fix this, John," I said quietly, my voice barely a whisper. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you, and right now, I don't think I even want to." His face crumpled in sorrow, but there was no pity left in me. I had tried to be the forgiving wife, the understanding partner, but now I was done. I couldn't continue to sacrifice my own dignity, my own well-being, just to make him feel better about his actions. I had to take care of myself for once. The silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to fill it with words. I didn't need him to explain himself anymore. I had been listening to his excuses for too long, and now it was my turn to be heard. "I think it's time for us to stop pretending," I said, my voice firm, even though my heart was breaking. "It's time for you to figure out what you want with your life, because I'm done being your second choice." John's eyes filled with emotion, but I couldn't bring myself to care anymore. He had made his choice when he sold our house, when he handed over $400,000 to Liza and moved her in. That was the moment the marriage ended, even if neither of us had fully accepted it yet. "I'm not your second choice anymore," I said, standing up and walking away, my resolve strengthening with every step. "You've made your bed, now you can lie in it." For the first time in a long while, I felt in control. The anger and pain still simmered beneath the surface, but now there was something else, something stronger. There was a quiet, burning determination in me, a realization that I didn't need him. I had the power to move on, to build a life for myself, even if it meant starting over. I wasn't going to let him drag me down with his guilt or his remorse. I wasn't going to let him believe that his apologies could fix a broken trust. It was time to let go. As I walked away, I felt the weight of the past fall off my shoulders, just a little. The path ahead was unclear, but I was done being stuck in the same old patterns. I was done being his doormat. It was time to reclaim my life. The following days were filled with tension, but there was something different about the way I carried myself now. Every glance, every word, every action from John and Liza felt different. They weren't the same people I had once known, and I certainly wasn't the same woman I had been before. I no longer shrank away from their presence. If anything, I stood taller, firmer, as if the mere act of standing my ground was a statement. I spent hours reflecting on how I had let things go for so long, how I had allowed John's neglect, his distance, and the lies to pile up until they were insurmountable. How had I let him convince me, time and again, that his empty apologies meant something? How had I allowed Liza to step into my life with such ease, to claim what was mine? But no more. I wasn't going to let either of them trample over me again. I could feel John's eyes on me now, the guilt in them palpable, but he was too afraid to speak. He knew that he couldn't repair what he had broken with just a few words, and the silence between us was heavier than any argument. He had crossed a line, and I wasn't going to let him erase it with a smile or an "I'm sorry." Liza, on the other hand, had started to push her boundaries. At first, it was subtle. Small comments about how things were better now, how we all just needed to accept the new normal. Her words, always wrapped in sweetness, felt like daggers aimed at the heart of my dignity. One evening, she approached me as I was sitting on the porch, staring out at the horizon, trying to find some peace in the chaos. I could hear her heels click on the wooden floorboards before she said anything, announcing her presence without needing to. "Lena, can we talk?" she asked, her voice oozing false sweetness. "I just think it's time you let go of the past. John and I are trying to build something here, and I'm sure you want to be at peace too." I turned slowly to face her, my gaze steady and unflinching. "Peace?" I repeated. "You think I'll find peace by accepting you in my home? By pretending that you didn't steal everything I built?" She flinched, but only for a moment, her smile never wavering. "I'm just trying to help," she said, her tone almost patronizing. "We all need to move on. Don't you think it's time?" Her words sent a jolt of anger through me, but I swallowed it down. Anger would only give her more power. I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. "I don't need you to help me," I said coldly. "And as for moving on, it's not your place to decide that for me. You may be in my house, but you're not going to tell me how to live my life. You're not going to tell me how to heal." Her expression faltered for the briefest of moments, but she quickly recovered. "I don't think you understand," she said, her voice tightening. "I've made my place here. I'm not going anywhere, Lena." I met her gaze without hesitation, every ounce of strength in my voice and eyes. "And neither am I. This is still my home, and no matter how much you want to erase me from it, you won't." She stepped back, a flash of irritation crossing her face, before she masked it with that perfect smile again. "Well, it's good to know you're still holding on to something," she said, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "But remember, you're not the only one who's been hurt here." Her words stung, but I wasn't going to let her win. I wasn't going to let her turn the tables and make me feel guilty for standing up for myself. "I don't owe you anything," I said firmly. "I've been the one left to pick up the pieces of my broken life, while you've waltzed in here, thinking you can take what's mine. But I'm done being your target." She didn't reply, just turned on her heel and walked back inside. The door slammed behind her, but I didn't move. My heart was pounding in my chest, but this time, it wasn't from fear. It was from strength. I had taken a stand, and in that moment, I realized something important. This wasn't just about John or Liza. This was about me. I wasn't fighting to win them back. I wasn't fighting for the house, the money, or even the past. I was fighting for myself, my dignity, my peace of mind, and my future. I stood there for a long time, letting the breeze wash over me, grounding myself in that quiet victory. I had won something more important than any material possession. I had regained control of my life. And now, it was time to make the next move. The days grew heavier as the weeks passed, and I felt the weight of it all pressing down on me. Every room in this house felt like a battlefield, but the battles weren't always loud. Most of them were silent, waged within me, in the quiet corners of my mind. Every time I saw John and Liza together, laughing or whispering to each other, something inside me broke all over again. I had fought back. I had stood up for myself, and that should have felt like a victory. But instead, it felt like a slow, grinding ache, a constant reminder of what I had lost. I couldn't just erase the years of love, of trust, of memories that had once been so sacred. They had been taken from me, not just by the betrayal, but by the realization that the life I had built was crumbling. I tried to keep my distance, tried to hold my head high, but the loneliness was suffocating. When I went to bed at night, I found myself staring at the ceiling, fighting back tears, questioning everything. How had I let myself get here? How had I let him take so much from me without even realizing it? Even though I had my moments of clarity, moments when I knew I was strong and capable of moving forward, the emotional toll was relentless. It was like a constant undercurrent, tugging at my every thought, reminding me of what I had lost. And then there were the sleepless nights, when the pain felt sharp and raw, and all I could do was lie awake in the dark, wondering if I would ever feel whole again. I thought about the future. I thought about the years ahead. Without John, without the family I had imagined, and with the haunting presence of Liza in my life. The idea of starting over seemed impossible at times. The grief was overwhelming, like a weight on my chest, making it hard to breathe. But somewhere in the quiet of those nights, I found something. It wasn't comfort, not exactly, but it was a spark of resilience. Maybe it wasn't about fixing everything or even moving on. Maybe it was about learning to live with the pain, to grow stronger in spite of it. Because that was the reality I had to face. I wasn't going to get my old life back. I wasn't going to get back the man I had loved. But I could get something else, myself. I wasn't done yet. Even in the darkest moments, when the sadness threatened to swallow me whole, I knew I had to keep going. For me. For the future I still had ahead of me, no matter how uncertain it was. One day, I decided to do something for myself, something that had nothing to do with John or Liza. I went to the park, sat by the lake, and just watched the water ripple in the wind. It was a small thing, but it was a step. I wasn't hiding anymore. I wasn't retreating into the shadows of my own grief. I was starting to breathe again, starting to feel like I might survive this. And the more I took time for myself, the more I realized something important. This wasn't just about rebuilding my life. It was about reclaiming my peace. I didn't need John to give me closure. I didn't need Liza's approval to move on. I just needed to find the strength within myself to keep walking forward, one step at a time. But it wasn't easy, not by any means. I still had my moments of weakness, still had my breakdowns, still had my nights when I felt like I couldn't go on. But I learned something. Grief doesn't have to break you. It doesn't have to define you. It can be a part of you, a chapter in your story, but it doesn't have to be the end of the story. It took time, but slowly I began to rebuild. I began to find peace in the things that used to bring me joy. I spent time with friends, rekindled old hobbies, and even started to dream again. Dreams that didn't involve John or Liza or anyone else. They were mine. And that, more than anything, was what I needed to heal. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, I began to feel the lightness again. The emotional toll had been heavy, but it was no longer the weight I carried every day. It was just a scar now, a part of me, but not all of me. I still had a long road ahead of me, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel afraid to walk it. The days after my emotional breakdown were some of the hardest of my life, but also some of the most transformative. I started to understand something that had eluded me for so long. The healing process wasn't linear. It wasn't a straight line from pain to peace. There were steps forward, and then there were days where I took a step back. But that's what growth was, wasn't it? Not a smooth, uninterrupted path, but a series of struggles, moments of clarity, and the realization that no matter how many times I fell, I could always rise again. I wasn't finished. I wasn't broken. And slowly, I began to find my way back to myself. It started with small changes. I began taking better care of myself, physically and emotionally. I rediscovered hobbies I'd once loved, like painting and walking in the park, things that had always brought me peace. These were the things that helped me start to rebuild my sense of self. Outside of everything that had happened, I also began to spend more time with friends, old friends, the ones who had been there before, when life was simpler. They reminded me of who I was before all of this chaos had descended. They saw the woman I had been, the woman I could still be, and they never stopped supporting me. One day, after months of silence and distance, John called me. At first, I thought about ignoring it, but then I realized I needed to hear him out. I needed to know if he had truly changed or if he was still the same man who had abandoned me. He apologized again, but this time, there was something different in his voice. It wasn't just guilt, it was regret. Genuine regret. He admitted that he had been selfish, that he had allowed his desires to cloud his judgment, and he admitted that he had hurt me in ways he could never fix. I've been so focused on making up for my mistakes with Liza that I've forgotten what really matters, he said, his voice hoarse. I know I can't undo what I did, but I want you to know how deeply sorry I am. You deserved so much more from me. For the first time, I could hear the truth in his words. But that didn't change anything. The past was still the past, and as much as he wished things could be different, I had come to realize that the only person who could truly change my life was me. I appreciate your apology, John, I said softly, but I've changed too. I can't go back to the person I was before. I've learned to stand on my own, and I'm not sure I'll ever be the same woman you knew. The silence between us was heavy, but it wasn't uncomfortable. I wasn't angry anymore. I was at peace with what had happened. I had to be. I was finally free from the weight of needing his approval, free from the weight of my past. I understand, he whispered, his voice filled with the weight of his own regrets. I just hope that one day you'll forgive me. I didn't say anything at first. Forgiveness was a long way off. It didn't mean that I wanted him back in my life, not in the way he wanted. But what I realized in that moment was that forgiveness wasn't for him. It was for me. Holding on to the anger, the hurt, the betrayal. It was like carrying a heavy stone that weighed me down. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to let it go. I don't know if I can forgive you just yet, John, I said, my voice steady. But I'm not going to carry this anger anymore. I'm not going to let it control me. There was a long pause. And then he spoke, his voice softer than before. I understand, Lena. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I'll be here, no matter how long it takes. I hung up the phone and sat there for a moment, letting his words linger in the air. The past was still with me, but it no longer held power over me. I had taken the first step toward moving on, and that was enough for now. Over the next few weeks, I started to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. It was faint at first, like a flicker of light in the distance. But it was there. I had gone through the storm, and now, I could see the beginning of a new dawn. I wasn't sure what the future held. I didn't know if I would ever fully heal from the betrayal, or if I would ever trust again. But I knew one thing. I had learned how to survive. I had learned how to stand up for myself, how to reclaim my life, and no matter what happened, I would keep moving forward, one step at a time. The road to healing wasn't easy, it never would be, but I was no longer afraid to walk it.